When you hear the name Dracula, what comes to mind? Probably a caped, feigned vampire lurking in a spooky Transylvanian castle, right? Bram Stoker's 1997 novel created an icon of horror that has captivated us for over a century. But what if I told you the real man who inspired this legendary monster was far more complex, and in some ways, even more terrifying than the fictional account? Today, we're unmasking the true face of Dracula, Vlad the Impaler. Let's travel back to the 5th, 10th century to a region called Wallachia, which is part of modern-day Romania. This was a turbulent time, a land caught between two mighty empires, the expanding Ottoman Empire to the south and the Kingdom of Hungary to the north. It was into this volatile world that Vlad III was born around 1431. He was a prince, a member of the House of Dracula. His father, Vlad II, was inducted into a Christian military order called the Order of the Dragon. The Romanian word for dragon is Drac, and his father became known as VladDracula, meaning Vlad the Dragon. Consequently, Vlad III was called Dracula, which simply means son of the dragon. It had nothing to do with vampires, but everything to do with a legacy of defending Christendom. Vlad's childhood was anything but ordinary. To secure a fragile peace, his father sent him and his younger brother, Radu, to the Ottoman court as political hostage. Imagine being a young boy living in the heart of your enemy's empire. It was here, surrounded by power, intrigue, and brutality, that Vlad's worldview was forged. He learned the language, the culture, and the military tactics of the Ottomans, knowledge that would become his greatest weapon. But these years also hardened him, fueling a deep-seated hatred for the empire that held him captive. This wasn't just a political struggle for him. It was personal. After his father and older brother were brutally assassinated by rival nobles, Vlad fought his way to the Wallachian throne. He ruled 3 separate times, and his reign was defined by one singular goal: to maintain Wallachia's independence at all costs. He was a brilliant military strategist and a ruthless leader who understood that to rule in such a treacherous time, he needed to command not just respect, but absolute fear. And this is where he earned his infamous nickname, Vlad the Impaler, or Vlad Țepeș in Romanian. Now, we need to talk about impalement. It was a horrific and agonizingly slow method of execution. Vlad didn't invent it, but he perfected its use as a tool of psychological warfare. When Ottoman armies invaded, they weren't just met with soldiers. They were met with forests of impaled bodies, thousands of them, left to rot on stakes along the roads. The message was clear and chilling. This is what happens to enemies of Wallachia. The sheer horror of these sights was enough to make entire armies turn back. He used this tactic not just on foreign invaders, but also on his own people, corrupt nobles, criminals, and anyone he deemed a threat to his power, to his enemies. He was a monster. But to many of his subjects who craved order and protection from the Ottomans, he was a stern but just ruler, a national hero. One of the most famous stories tells of 2 Ottoman envoys who came to his court and refused to remove their turbans, citing religious custom. Vlad, in a twisted display of respecting their traditions, supposedly had their turbans nailed to their heads so they would never have to remove them. Another legend claims he once held a great feast for the city's poor and sick, and after they had eaten their fill, he barred the doors and burned the hall down, claiming he was ridding the city of its burdens. While many of these tales were likely exaggerated by his enemies, especially German pamphlets that painted him as a bloodthirsty tyrant, they contributed to his terrifying reputation. These stories spread across Europe, creating the image of a demonic ruler who reveled in cruelty. So, how did this historical warrior prince become a blood-sucking vampire? For that, we have to thank Bram Stoker. In the late 19th century, Stoker was researching for his new horror novel. He stumbled upon a book about Wallachia that mentioned Vlad Dracula and his brutal methods. The name Dracula itself sounded sinister to an English ear, and the tales of his cruelty provided the perfect, grim backstory for a supernatural monster. Stoker blended these historical fragments with Transylvanian folklore about Strigoi, the restless spirits of the dead who rise from their graves to torment the living. He took the name and the brutal reputation of a real man, placed him in a mysterious land, and added the supernatural element of vampirism. The result was a masterpiece of fiction, but one that completely overshadowed the real history. It's fascinating to see how the lines blurred. Today, when tourists visit Bran Castle in Romania, often marketed as Dracula's castle, they're walking into a fiction. Vlad probably never even set foot in Bran Castle. It was just a convenient, spooky-looking fortress that fit the narrative. Vlad's actual primary residence was the Ponari Citadel, now mostly in ruins. The real Vlad the Impaler wasn't a supernatural creature of the night. He was a man of flesh and blood, a product of a violent and unforgiving era. He was a defender of his homeland who used terror as a weapon of state. Was he a sadistic monster? To his victims, absolutely. Was he a national hero? Too many Romanians. Yes. He is a figure of stark contrasts, a paradox of patriotism and brutality. His end was as violent as his life. He was likely killed in battle against the Ottomans in 1476. His head was supposedly taken to Constantinople and displayed on a stake, a final, grim testament to the Ottoman victory over their most feared adversary. But his legacy lived on, first in the dark legends spread by his enemies, and later transformed into the immortal vampire we know today. Understanding the story of Vlad the Impaler is about more than just correcting a pop culture myth. It's about understanding how history is written, how legends are born, and how a real person can be twisted into something entirely different. The real Dracula was not a vampire, but a prince who fought with unparalleled ferocity for his people and his faith, leaving behind a legacy of both terror and admiration that continues to fascinate us centuries later. He reminds us that sometimes the truth of history can be even more compelling than the fiction it inspires. So, the next time you see a Dracula movie or dress up as a vampire for Halloween, remember the real son of the dragon, the complex, ruthless, and brilliant Prince of Wallachia, Vlad Țepeș.